Sharing. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. This is Panos from LearnWords. Hope you can hear us. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box of Zoom. Let us know where you're logging in from. We're super happy to have you here with us today for another installment of a LearnWords webinar about customer education with some great company with us today. Today, we will be using Slido for a couple of interactions and polls throughout the presentations. So you can either participate by using the Slido app on your Zoom, or if you are not connected into Zoom, you can just join through the QR code that you will be seeing on your screens in a couple of places. Also, we will be using the Slido Q&A feature instead of Zoom this time. So feel free to send your questions there throughout the session. Feel free to upvote any questions that you see are interesting, and we'll try in the end, along with my guests here, to tackle as many as possible. Also, with us, we have our trusted co-pilots, Elfie and Coco, on the chat. So they will be answering any practical questions as we go, and overall try to be helpful and point you to the right direction and the right resources. We'll just take one more moment and try to wait for a few more people to join in. I see the numbers are rising. Today we'll be diving into a topic that's very close to my heart about customer training and effectively one training strategy to rule them all. This is something that very frequently we encounter here in LearnWords. So many companies struggling with fragmented training programs, don't know how to treat their different audiences, and they end up with different tactics, different plans, different projects, and they usually struggle to bring everything under one umbrella. So our hope today is that you're gonna uncover some insights and a framework that allow you to tackle this and unify your training programs. I see the numbers here stabilizing, so we don't want to keep you waiting any longer, and we can go along with our presentation. So first, let's try this Slido to see if this works. Can you guys see the question here? You can participate. Let me see if it's running correctly.
Panos, I believe you have to turn on the app in Zoom.
Yep, it is probably, but I'll try again. Let me see. We're learning, guys. Just give me a moment. Let's see if it works as it should. Yep, here I am. So is it working now, the interaction? It should be. I don't see any votes. Help me, folks, just send a vote to see if it works. Okay. Georgia, Toronto, Atlanta. Yep, it works. Technology, always tricky, but we managed to do it this time. Great, quite an international audience. Several time zones. Thanks, people, for making the effort and being here. Atlanta is taking the lead. Great. So feel free to introduce yourselves, as you mentioned here on chat, and also connect between each other, and feel free to connect also with Vicky and me. So let's go to the actual important stuff. Very briefly, an intro about LearnWords, who we are. We are a game-changing e-learning platform For customer education and partner enablement, LearnWorlds has more than 11,000 now customers, and we are training close to 20 million learners all along across different industries. So just to brag a bit here and throw around a few logos, these are companies that are now trying doing internal training on top of the LearnWorlds platform, training customer education, external audiences, partner stakeholders, whatever you can imagine. Every modern knowledge-based business requires a trusted e-learning partner to handle the different training needs that appear in every industry and in every line of business. But let's go to our esteemed guest, Vicky Kennedy from Ectus.
Sorry, I think Panos, you're lost the deck, the sharing of the deck.
We lost the deck. What's happening?
Yeah.
I think Slido took over. So let me try again. Just going to the previous one where I was bragging a bit. Something happens with the screen here. So hope we're getting it now. Nope. Well, I think Slido took over our sharing and is trying to control our experience, but we won't let it. So yep, here's the screen where I was showing some of the customers that LearnWorlds is powering for their customer education needs. Large enterprises, SMBs that are using LearnWorlds to create several types of programs to cover their different internal and external audiences. And going to the important part, our esteemed guest, Vicky Kennedy. Welcome, Vicky. It's great having you again here in LearnWorlds for another of our webinars. Could you please introduce yourself to your audience?
Yeah, definitely. And it's definitely great to be back. Thank you, Panos. I've been working in this space for quite a while, a couple decades, and specifically in the tech and corporate space for about the last 13 years, before that in higher education. So have had a breadth of different experiences there. Also within that, worked in both the practitioner side, building programs, and then also in product side. So I've actually worked in ed tech, running product teams. So had a chance to wear a lot of different hats, and of course as a consultant, which is what I do predominantly today. So that's really the breadth of my experience. As it says here, I've worked specifically for some of the larger companies like Amazon and Meta, consulted with some of those other larger companies as well. Of course, also consulted with quite a lot of smaller companies and startups. I've published in a few of the training magazines that you see here, and some of the other publications out there, and done quite a bit of speaking. And again, this is I think my second time with y'all, so very, very happy to be here. I did launch my own company called Ectus in 23, so that's what I do now, and that's you're going to get an insight into basically how I work with my clients as we talk through this topic.
Great. So what are you going to talk to us about today?
Yeah. So as the title says, one strategy, multiple audiences. One of the things that I've sort of found this passion for is getting into an organization that has a lot of complex initiatives going on and a lot of different sort of moving parts. And often we see a lot of siloed teams in the training and education space. And bringing all that together into a unified strategy is really, it's not for everyone. It can be really a challenging project. But I just really love getting in there and doing that, because it really helps elevate the impact of education. And for me, it's all that kind of nerdy passion around seeing the impact education can have on a business. So today's agenda, we'll talk specifically about the elements that I have seen over the years of what really makes high performing organizations with their education. We'll look at how that unified approach can actually lead to a higher ROI, higher learner engagement. I'll give you some specific steps on how to start getting there, so you can audit and optimize your training strategy. And we'll look at some best practices around things like modularizing content and providing delivery. So that it will conclude with a little preview into a measurement framework that I use so that you can actually measure that ROI. But yeah, ideally we will give you some takeaways, actual action items that you could take back to you so you can get started with this pretty big unification project.
Great, thanks. So let's go then to your first 7 dimensions.
Yeah, so this is my framework. 7 dimensions of effective education strategy. And I talk quite a bit about this. So if anyone on the call has followed me or seen me, you're probably like, oh gosh, this again, because it's something that I just have a lot of passion about. This is a framework that I developed over years of working with organizations of different sizes. It's a framework that has 2 really core uses. One is when you're setting up your first education program, your first either product training, customer education, it gives you that sort of almost step-by-step of what to think about, but also very specifically in this context of, okay, we're already live, we have all these different programs, we have all these different things going on across the company, how can we bring this together? And so it has those 2 purposes. I'll take a few minutes just to talk through what these 7 dimensions are, and then as we get into some of the slides there, we'll talk more about what to do with all that information. But it's very specifically designed in order. So that first dimension is around program strategy. And that's really ensuring that your education programs are actually tied to solving a business problem or opportunity. And so that's really like the kind of what everything else flows from that. So rather than kind of being reactive and creating content, we're really thinking about what is the actual problem or opportunity we're solving for. For example, some common ones that we see are, maybe we're solving for a customer churn problem, we're solving for retention, maybe we're solving for an onboarding problem, maybe we're solving for something on the partnership side. There could be opportunities, like maybe we're using education to build, to reach out to a new market segment. So a lot of different uses. When we look at programs across a business, we're thinking about a program that was initially designed from a strategy to solve for that business problem. And so this is kind of the first piece here where we really want to get set on what are the programs that we have across the organization. I'm going to talk a little bit more tactically about how, like, where you can start with that project, but everything starts from a program strategy. That second dimension is around audience strategy. So we can say kind of at a high level who you may be training, but really there's a lot of different audience segments. Whether or not you're focused on training all of them today, you want to think about all the different audiences that you may train in the future. And that usually starts at the highest level of something like customers, partners, prospects, and employees. Depending on your industry, you may have like I've seen clinicians in the healthcare space, for example. So really thinking at the highest level, the audience that you're training, and then going into the subsegments of those audiences so that you can connect those dots between the program itself and who's involved in that program, essentially. So if we go back to the idea of like a customer churn problem, obviously you have certain customer segments that are involved in that. You may also have a certain employee segment. So let's not forget that there's potentially, like, it's not just a question of internal and external training, which is something that we have in the past heard a lot about, that sort of delineation between internal and external. I personally, I know I'm not the only one, but I don't look at it that way. I look at it like we have education across a company and we have to think about all the different segments that are involved in meeting those goals. So that third dimension is content strategy. So content strategy often is used in a very broad sense, where you'll hear people kind of use content strategy to cover everything as far as all the different content and maybe some of that audience piece and some of that program piece. I think it's important to break that out very clearly around the content, the approach to the content that's specific to the audience that you're training for that program. So that's including your curriculum. If it is competency-based, it's including your actual modular curriculum. It's including a competency framework so that you know what you're actually teaching to drive what outcomes, to drive what behavior. It's also your content, your taxonomies, your leveling, so that that's all consistent. And of course, we have different formats of content. So all of that is really your content strategy, and that is in service of the first 2, your audience strategy and your program strategy. So as you might imagine, we get into 4, delivery strategy. And this is one that I do talk about, quite a bit about because, and I'm sure Panos, you may have some thoughts on this one, but sometimes organizations jump quick into what tool they're going to use, what tech they're going to use to build out their education before having real clarity in 1, 2, and 3. So we need to know what we're building, for what purpose, for who, and what we're actually teaching before we can really design the right delivery strategy to achieve that. So that's about, ensuring that you have the right tech stack. You're thinking about your channels the right way. You're thinking about the modalities the right way. But all of that, again, is in service of 1, 2, and 3. That 5th piece, the marketing strategy, when you do have these education programs in place, it's not it's not a miracle where you build them and they will come, right? I don't know what movie that's from, but dated myself with that reference. But the marketing strategy is really about making sure you have a go-to-market plan for every program and an ongoing engagement, just like any marketing. If there's any marketers on the call, you have your personas, you have your different funnel. You need to make sure you're getting people into the training, engaging them, and re-engaging them after the training. And so it's really having a full marketing, like education marketing strategy. There's a whole webinar you could probably do on that. That's really just talking about that, because it's one of the more often overlooked pieces of these of a full education strategy. But also, like, that ties into that follows your delivery strategy, because you're going to be using that tech stack to engage with your learners. You need to use nudges, you need to use communication, email, whatever it is, but you want to essentially connect with those learners throughout their journey. So number 6 is the measurement strategy. So now we have these first 5 dimensions. We can measure the results of that. We want to look at who we're training and whether we're actually getting changing behavior there. And how that behavior change is impacting that business problem that we're solving for, right? So the measurement strategy, which is what I'll kind of conclude later with the last slide, will really show you like a framework that you could potentially use to connect all these dots. This is bringing your education more from a place of, like, again, kind of that reactive, let's see if there's any impact on education, to something that's more proactive. Just to go back to what I was saying before, like in any other place in business, you have typically like, here's a problem and here's something we need to solve. So let's measure that we've solved it. So let's bring that back to training and education, so it's more purposeful that way. The 7th dimension is one that I actually added recently, because I had this last year at 6 dimensions. The 7th dimension was really something that was coming up all the time anyway in my conversations and in my work with organizations. And it's got 2 sides to it, organizational strategy. It's got the side of how are your teams set up for success? Do you have the right resources in your education and training teams to actually implement everything we have in 1 through 6? So it's the actual sort of capacity and resourcing within the team. It's also got a broader meaning of your organizational strategy at the organizational level. So if we are unifying all of these training programs, we ideally have very clear organizational structure and strategy so that these teams can either work together as one, in my perfect world, or at minimum, at least have a like kind of a circular structure where there's a shared strategy and a shared taxonomy. So that's the 7 dimensions. Kind of the framework itself. And again, that's what I use both in starting net new, because we can start from that place of what's the program, and we can now use this to audit. So in the rest of these slides, we'll talk about how those of you who are on the call, you're probably not starting something from scratch, because you know, if you liked this title, it's probably because you have multiple training programs or you're a part of that. So let's talk about like how we can actually get into that more. So I think we can hop to the next and maybe, yeah. Let's see.
Yes, right away. I just wanted to comment here, Vicky, that I really love the 7th dimensional framework, because it makes absolutely sense in hindsight. I think everybody has done the mistake of skipping a couple of steps and starting, in a random place and then trying to connect the dots, and usually it doesn't happen. And at least in our experience here in LearnWorlds, it usually depends on the person championing the project or this education project to which step they will start. So if it's, the content writers, or if it's the instructional designers, they might start from 3. If it's the tech stack or somebody who is tech savvy, especially in tech businesses, they might choose the platform first and the tech stack before thinking about anything else, about what are we creating and for whom, and what is the purpose, and what should we measure here. Or in some cases, it's the marketer who is trying to implement some kind of customer education service. They've seen it somewhere else. They've seen the HubSpot Academy. They believe it makes sense, and it does. But if you start on step 5 and you've missed a couple of steps, it will be extremely difficult for you to backtrack then and connect the dots and create a strategy. So not all the steps might be equally important for all enterprises. You may already have a few things in place, but you have to start thinking, and this is something that internally I have to say that we have started thinking around this program strategy, and make sure that at least we have something on each one of these steps of this dimension.
Yeah, for sure. In true form, my dog has just started going crazy. Do y'all hear the dog? Is it interrupting?
No, it's okay.
Okay, because it's perfect.
Some background noise, company, nothing important.
Perfect work from home timing there. Okay, so yeah, we wanted to look at essentially what the definition of an education program is, because as I mentioned, everything starts from that that program strategy piece, right? And that program strategy piece can be a little elusive if it's not how you're thinking about your education program. So I really just wanted to take a minute to talk through how I define an education program, and also just to show off my AI design skills, because that was the first image I created with AI like a year ago. I can probably do better now. But the reason I chose that image is because, especially with training programs and any kind of like education and learning programs, it's not uncommon to really put the focus on the content itself. And you're like you're almost looking at your success as the amount of courses you build, right? Like I would wonder if we could do like a show of hands, how many have been gold on like number of courses launched, right? Or number of lessons launched or whatever it is, number of workshops held. And so there can be this over index of this water, right? Like just put the content in there, build the content, let's get it out there. Oh, we need somebody to know how to use this feature. So let's build a course that covers that. We need to know how people need to know how this particular process works. Let's build a training on that. And all of a sudden you end up with just a lot of different content. But when we think about the program itself, that's where the piping comes in. That's really about making sure that we have this proactive focus on connecting the right learners, the right essentially like destination with the content. So we're piping that content to the right place. It's not about we have to blow everything up and create sort of net new content. You likely have a great wealth of content at each of your organizations. You probably have an entire academy, or maybe you have other platforms that are are in use, but you have a lot of content there in that body of water. So now it's about really making sure that the focus is on, again, are we connecting that content to the right person? One of the things that I talk a bit about too is the this concept of like a library, right? You can have a library. A library can be very valuable. You walk in, select the book. Maybe there's some book recommendations out there, but a library doesn't replace more of a formal education, right? Like you don't go to a library instead of going to like college, for example. You go to a library as a resource, and that could be your self-select. And I think that I do see sometimes a lot more of the emphasis on that library approach than more of a formal, like let's make sure that we're actually targeting the content and delivering the right content for the right purposes. So the education program is really these pipes. I mentioned a few in the last slide. You might have like an onboarding, or you might have a certification program, but it's really just making sure that we're connecting those to the right purpose. So I wanted to talk about that for a minute, because I know sometimes one of the things that I started with organizations is even defining a program, because again, if there was a way to do a show of hands, I wonder how many of you have either your entire like customer education or product training is just referred to as one program, our customer education program. And it's like everything under the sun that you do for customer education is just referred to as a customer education program. Or you may have like everything on the LMS is a program, right? Like the entire academy or site, whatever you call your site, is called a program. And the challenge with that is because you're just including so much, it becomes really difficult to focus on whether something's being successful or not, right? Because we've kind of lost that targeted approach. And also if you're looking at everything on a platform, that's a platform, not a program, right? So just kind of taking a step back to really think about how you define your programs and making sure there's clarity on the definition of the program. And so that regardless of what that definition works out to be at your organization, it's consistent. And so you have that across. So that's really kind of one of the initial core things there.
Vicky, again, this is something that we've seen too many times. I totally agree with this build it and they will come approach, and which in many projects and many programs being killed by this, by just delivering an immense amount of content, which is extremely expensive to build, at least in a high quality, even in the era of AI. So here, at least what we're trying to implement here internally, and our suggestions to our customers is build the right content at the right time. So it's equivalent to just-in-time manufacturing. Don't go out and build a library. This is going to be exhaustive. It will not get you to the right direction. Build just the right amount of content that you need. Prototype, an MVP, to test one particular channel, to see one particular pipe that you have here in your excellent AI drawing, whether it's feeding the right people and quenching their thirst, and whether it creates demand, and then you can go on and proceed and complete the rec. So this can really fit also with a startup approach of how to develop your content and validate your content before going blindly and delivering several pounds or kilograms of content, which may sound impressive, but it will not bring you closer to your KPIs and to the objectives of your programs. So here is something, let's see if we can get it right this time. I'll try to launch again this little Slido here. I hope it will help me this time. Yep, it works. So what's the number one reason you want to unify your training programs? Content duplication definitely can be an expensive issue.
This is fun. I haven't seen Slido before.
When you get it to work, it is fun. So I think now at least it's working.
I'm loving these answers too. It's so interesting. It's so interesting to see that first one being the top.
And I think your other couple of questions, Vicky, we should have added them to Slido because they were very interesting as well about the effort that people are doing now on their own problems.
Yeah.
So I think let's give it a couple more seconds. It's probably fairly representative.
I feel like the majority of people on this call are probably training and learning practitioners just based off of that answer.
Mm-hmm. Is this right, people? Just feel free to comment here on chat and let us know if that's what you do and if Vicky is right. So I think we can continue then.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, as we see, why this matters, why take the time to unify? I mean, obviously, it is pretty common that we see a lot of siloed education and training teams and organizations, even in small companies, which is sort of surprising. You'll see like multiple teams kind of working differently, just on different training, and so there's some really valuable reasons to prioritize this project. Of course, the first one is as everyone, pretty much the top answer here, improving the learning experience across the customer journey. It's, I think as just people that have been customers of other things, you can probably understand the frustration of seeing like a help center over here or seeing some training content over here and then getting like a workshop invitation from another, email or something, and it's all kind of disparate. And some of that learning doesn't actually align. Like you may even be taught something different from the marketing team than from the product team, or something a little bit different from your account manager than whoever else it is. And so that just becomes a frustrating experience as a learner when you don't really have that consistency. And so the number one thing, as again, I think was a great reflection of the poll, is to improve that learning experience, not just in the actual UX so that I know where to go for everything, but also just in the consistency of that source of truth. One of the things that we know about, in the world of customer education, and if there's anyone on the call too that's focusing more on employee learning, that's a whole nother ball game there. But this idea of like of teaching the proprietary education of whatever your organization does, whether it's you're teaching the solutions, you're teaching a process, you're teaching a different way to think about the industry, but it's really like you're teaching outward this content that doesn't exist anywhere else because it's coming from your company. And the hardest thing about working in those roles is getting that source of truth and getting that aligned source of truth. Because, if you're teaching like, 8th grade algebra or whatever the equivalent of that is outside of the States, but if you're teaching like, math or science, like that's pretty much known facts. You have a textbook, you can teach that, and it's going to be the same no matter where you're teaching it for the most part. And then with this kind of education, that's not the case, right? Like you have different flavors, you have like different understandings of how to use the software. And so that is just something where, that unification, if nothing else, can really drive a much better unified experience. So that's the first one. And then improving the efficiency in workflows and tech stack and resources. Less of you answer that. And I think that's why I was saying it's probably that most of you are learner practitioners, because sometimes if those are in an operations role, or anyone on the more the leadership side is going to be looking at things like that kind of efficiency. And when we have multiple teams working on similar initiatives, we have, as you might imagine, duplicative workflows, duplicative tech stacks. I've seen organizations with like 3 or 4 different LMSs, that are kind of like there's some overlaps there. And of course, resources. So if we can unify this, we often can get really clear. It doesn't mean you're reducing headcount necessarily. It means that you're just getting really clear on working in a very efficient way, so that you have like learning experience designers, and you have your, source of truth, like curriculum builders, and of course, tech stack, which we'll talk through. And then the third one, which is really, really important, is improving the chance of measuring and realizing positive ROI. Because if it is this sort of disparate, siloed, different teams doing different things, you can try within those teams to show the impact. But if we go back to the framework I showed, and we really think about a large scale like program, there's probably multiple teams working on that one business problem. And just to talk about business strategy for a minute, when you have these high-level business goals, like let's just take customer churn, for example. Customer churn is obviously not any one person's problem. It's not any one team that can solve for that. Oftentimes, it's a key metric for customer success, but it's a metric that many departments across an organization have to keep in mind. And so it's never going to be like the education team or an education program is directly responsible for customer churn. But it's going to be one input and one influencer in whether there is going to be any kind of movement in customer churn. And so if you're connecting these dots and you're thinking about the different teams that are working on this together, and you're kind of uniting with any other training or education initiatives that are working towards customer churn, it gives you a much better chance of showing the impact of that and having clarity in what you're doing than if you're just doing this in sort of disparate ways. So those are 3 reasons why. I don't think I have to convince anyone on the webinar for that, because again, you joined the webinar, so obviously you want to do it. But these are 3 reasons why, this, or 3, I should say 3 benefits that you would see from unifying programs.
And Vicky, if I may add here on your second point about the efficiency and the workloads, and I guess we're qualified to say that because we're coming from a platform angle. It's extremely important to have tools that are going to grow with your projects and your programs and your education, and are flexible enough to support the different kinds of channels and the different types of use cases and business models that you would like to build. We've seen like LMSs, the traditional LMSs are quite expensive, cumbersome. They require an entire team to run. So if you can choose a flexible tool that you can customize and white label and make it on brand and connect it with with your tech stack, with your platform, your internal training tools, the tools of the trade, it's going to be extremely important, so that you can focus on what matters for you, identifying the right learners, creating the right content for them, and moving them along so that you can get to the positive ROI that you need at the end of the day to prove at an organizational level. So this is where a platform like LearnWorlds comes along.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so now the big questions are like, okay, great. These are all the things to think about, why, but how do we start doing this? And so this is where, there's a little more of the sort of what you can do step by step. So the first one is starting with those programs, unifying those programs. There is this 6-step planning tool that I have on our site on ectus.com under resources that you can certainly use. And I'm actually going to be updating this probably within the next month or so. So if you download it, you'll be one of the first to get the updates. But it is, just a tool to use, whether you use it or not. Essentially, will walk you through this sort of that framework from the lens of what's the purpose of your programs. And so just to kind of start with, use a little bit, your first step is identifying those problems you're solving. Is the problem well defined? Do we know why we have this learning experience? Do we know why we have this content? Do we know what we're trying to do? So it's well defined or not. Success can be measured or not. That's a really big one too. Like, we may have kind of an idea of what we're trying to do, but can you actually measure whether you're doing that or not? And if you start from the lens of, a business problem or opportunity comes into the conversation because there's some evidence that there's a problem or opportunity, right? So we know that there's probably some way to find that success, and you want to understand that you can actually measure that success. And then, of course, the third one is education the right solution for that problem? Which may or may not be the case. Those of you who've been in training roles for a while, you've probably been approached with some request to build a training, and it's really not the right solution for what the person making the request thinks it is. So those are just some of the basics there. The second one, I won't read through all this, but just to give you a sense of how this could work here, is the second piece here is understanding who you're training. So I mentioned that you have clarity in your audience segments, that those are defined, the subsegments are defined, and that you have learner personas defined for each of those. And you can work through this particular step, this particular checklist through the content. You understand what you're teaching. This is just giving you some thoughts here, like, do you have competencies in place? Do you have clear program outcomes from the content perspective? And so, of course, with instructional design, you have outcomes you're trying to achieve. You have objectives that you want the content to meet. So you want to make sure all of that is clear in the content. And then delivery and marketing and measurement, there's just some questions here that you could work through and just get a sense of basically like an audit, where are you today and what do we need to focus on? And so going through this checklist, and of course you could add your own boxes, just thinking about like, how can you understand, or how you're reaching your learners. So, I have here just some sort of suggested checklist items of like, how are you reaching your learners? Well, do you have the right technology available? Do you have personalization employed? Do you have effective methods per the program and audience? There could be some other things you want to think about, like, I don't know, maybe just the, do you have duplicative tech stacks or things like that? So whatever makes sense for you as you're going through this checklist, it will help you to sort of surface what are the areas that we need to work on. That first one is the most important, purpose. If you don't know that, start there. But then moving back down through this checklist, you can get a sense of, okay, well, we're doing really well with our purpose and our audience. Content, we need to focus more on delivery and make sure that we're really thinking about the most optimal way to deliver to our audiences. So this is sort of step one, is audit and align on your overall program strategy, and get a sense of where the gaps are.
Great, Vicky.
Yeah, so step two, this is the audience analysis piece for me is one of the more fun ones. This is one of the projects that I do with organizations where I'll bring in a number of stakeholders, because to get this bird's eye view of your audience, you typically need multiple people in the room. I mean, if you're a really small company, you may have somebody that wears all the hats and knows all the things. But especially the larger the company, the more you just don't have visibility into all of your customer segments, all of the different types of segments that interact with your company. So we bring in sort of like key stakeholders, and we do this whiteboarding exercise. And this, audience analysis will give you a sense of, at the highest level, in this example here, we have prospects, customers, and partners. And I mentioned earlier, you may also have, your employees in there. You may have like different types of individuals at that highest segment. The next rung down is the different subsegments. So in this example, for prospects, we have specifically product trial users, right? Like you can also think of that as sort of the customer journey of where they are. You may have prospects that haven't yet downloaded a trial and those that have. But if we kind of continue this thread, like the needs of those trial users from an educational point of view, the needs are that they need to be convinced of value and they need to get unstuck as they're using our trial, right? So these are the little circles, if you could read that. In each circle, we have basically the need of that segment or subsegment. So I'll read through another one here. Under customers, we have 3 different customer segments: students, standard users, and premium and enterprise users. Within that, we have a couple different types of users: product users, the ones who are directly in the product, and admins that are kind of adminning the product. And this is pretty, common, I think, if you're representing a software company on the call. And obviously, there's this same process would apply for any other kind of company. It's not like it has to be a technical. But going down to the subsegments there, then we look at product users, for example. In one of the circles we have, like, they need to reach that aha moment quickly. So when we identify the audience and all of their needs, we then can connect into whatever programs we have in place today to that need. So in this example, we have multiple programs that already exist across the company. How do we get a sense of what programs are serving what needs? And what we found in this example is that program A and C, for example, were both actually solving for that same problem. They're both trying to help those that are newer to the industry reach an entry level. And so that gives us a really great starting point to now look at how we can unify specifically program A and program C into one program that's really targeting this need. So this exercise is really just an important, I call it the audience analysis exercise, but it really does kind of connect both the program piece and the audience piece in so that we can really bring that to the, into the next stage.
Great.
I know I want to make sure I have enough time to get into all the meaty stuff. So, okay, so audience, and then unify your content strategy. This is where, I could talk for a few hours on just content strategy alone, as I'm sure many could, but one of the aspects of content strategy is making sure you have a competency framework and a modular curriculum that's going to scale across these different audiences. And one way to think about that is you typically have something that's kind of that foundational level. I think of it as like year one in college, right? Every one of your audiences is probably going to need to know some foundational bit about whatever it is that you're teaching, your solutions, your process, your tools. And so that foundational bit doesn't have to be audience specific. Your employees could engage with it, your partners, your customers. But as you get more into this area of the specific use of each segment and how they're using your tools, then you get more into these expertise and specialty. So having this sense of competency framework where you as part of your content strategy, whether or not this exists today, let's go back to the idea that we're trying to unify things, that you may have this kind of all over the place. One really good step here is to look at the content you have, but then also build this sort of modular framework experience and then start plugging your content into that, right? So I'm not saying you have to start over, okay, we didn't think about this, so we didn't build foundational content. You likely have a lot of this in place. So you build out this sort of modular framework where you can think about this way that it can apply to many programs, many audiences, and then you can get clear on the content that's either duplicative or where you have gaps. Maybe you're missing a lot of that foundational content. You're just doing a lot of that kind of high level expertise content. But the unifying your content strategy is definitely a big project, and I think we probably could spend a whole webinar on that alone. But this is again where you can also make sure you're using the same terminology and taxonomies across teams, thinking about leveling in a consistent way, and thinking about the structure in a consistent way.
And if I may add here, Vicky, one of the problems that we see with people is the granularity of the content they create. Even let's think about it, the size of the content they create. It's the traditional, I guess, classroom approach. We've all been through the same or similar educational systems. So when people want to create a program for one particular learning unit, for one particular feature of a software, they go out and create a 60-minute long video or a 45-minute long video, which is extremely difficult to produce, and it's extremely difficult to replace, to update in case something happens. So it's extremely important what you mentioned to start about with a competency framework, with the right levels, and even these today, even if people here on our webinar today are coming from an instructional design background or they have been through these things, they understand how to do it. But even a practitioner with some AI on the side, and this is something that we even integrate within Learnables, you can get a framework next to you to help you work along a taxonomy, to help you break down the content and create just the right amount, just the right quantum of a learning unit, of a video, of an ebook, of an assignment, that it will be easier for you to target the right audience for the right expertise or the right skill. And also it will be easy for you to complement, to add something extra, to bring in this extra level of specialty or expertise. That way you will have a modular program that you will be able to repurpose for the different uses of your different audiences. So you also need to think about how you produce your content, not only in terms of the competency and the level and the difficulty and the specific learning objective or learning outcome that we're trying to accomplish, but also be practical in the terms of the size of the content and how you can frame it with the things that need to be before or after. But make it modular even in this sense.
Yeah, I mean, I love that example you gave a minute ago where it's like, creating a 60-minute video because of needing to like launch one feature. And I think that's such a great example because 59 minutes of that 60-minute video is probably already covered in other content, right? And so getting clear on that and having the framework that you're building that into is 100% really going to help you to scale faster and more efficiently. So moving into the delivery strategy now, after we've done the first few steps there, we can really consider the tech stack and make, see like, okay, do we have multiple LMSs in play here? Do we have multiple ways that we're reaching the same audiences for the same purpose, for the same kind of content? Is there a way to get more efficient with our tech stack? And are we really choosing the right delivery modalities to deliver for each program? And so we could spend probably a lot of time too, just talking about the different types of content and reasons you would, different modalities out there. So you have something that's like in-app, for example, or something that's more workshop-based or on-demand e-learning. And you want to make sure you're connecting, the right modalities and the right delivery method to the right audience for the right goal. So this is a chance to really, once you have those first few things in place and have a sense of how that's tracking, you can now look at your delivery strategy with a sort of different lens and take a look again at the same kind of audit. What are we using today and where is there a chance to do something that's more impactful and more efficient? I've seen like multiple LMSs in play where you really just have a lot of redundant content or literally the same content in two different systems. And of course, there's a governance issue there, and we're going to start to see that kind of break down. But there can really be a benefit. It's not always the solution, but there can be a benefit to having a unification there within your LMS.
Especially when you have a platform or tools that help you repurpose your content for different audiences, especially like we see that for businesses every day that work across different languages in different markets, where you need one platform that will allow you to manage this content, translate it, repurpose it, and it can really be, especially for smaller teams, it can be very, very efficient and very effective to create all your programs around one platform. So this is definitely something that we encourage you to test out and also have a look at, learn also about how we have learned through our customers to deal with these kinds of problems and offer this flexibility and this support of different delivery methods, different channels, and different use cases under one platform.
Yeah, so bringing it all together, and I know I promised I wouldn't go over time, and I already have, so now I'm going to get in trouble with the Learn Rules crew.
We're fine. We're fine.
I love these questions coming in too. I'm kind of watching them like, oh, I want to answer those questions. But the last bit here, bringing it all together, this is the sneak peek I promised of the measurement framework that I do also have on the ECDIS site. But now that we have clarity on what those programs are, we have the business opportunity per program, we can really design this framework so that we know that the education that we're building is actually moving the needle towards that metric. So this kind of goes back to the common approach that we see of really sort of loose correlations between some activity that's happening in an LMS, for example, or some kind of engagement with training, and then trying to connect that to a real like high level metric where we're just going straight up to in this case net revenue retention or something similar. And really what we want to do is create a more purposeful connection of events. And there's two reasons for that. One is that we, as the practitioners, can see what's working and what isn't. It's not just about reporting this impact to leadership. It's about making sure that we're doing the right things in our education and that the education is indeed changing behaviors. So there's that. And then there's really just creating a more compelling ROI story for leadership and the executive team, because it's kind of a stretch to say like, oh, well, we had, 30% of our clients used the academy and they spent more. Like that's a real loose correlation. I know it works in some cases for people, but I think if you can get more clear on, well, why and how, as someone that's been in the executive team, I like to poke those questions, right? Like I want to know that we're talking about something and not just like an observable correlation. So in this example here, we have like an enterprise product adoption program We are driving the, sorry, I do use acronyms here. Net revenue retention is NRR, MQL is marketing qualified leads. So those are the top business metrics that we're using. And then we break that down into what of our audience segments, which of them are related to this particular program. What behavior are we trying to change or drive with our learning? In this example, seat assignment and utilization are things that we can actually measure. So we have to make sure we can actually grab that metric. And then the learning metric is, how do we know that learning happened? What was the efficacy there? So we usually look at something like an assessment of sorts, a quiz or an exam, even pulse checks in the course. But if you have to look at something like course attendance, at least it gives you a place to connect the dots between the learning and the behavior. So this is the breakdown, the framework that I do help implement, with organizations of all sizes. And even if you're starting from scratch, you can start this with just one line.
Very, very helpful, Vicky. And guys, I know that it sounds, it sounds like a cliche, but truly, if you don't measure something, you don't have any chance of improving it. And even if you are starting from now to build your program, just attach a metric to it. You might guess, you don't know where it will be, but you have to start from something. And here we're talking about unification. There isn't really one metric that can cover everything. There isn't a North Star, but your different programs, they each should have something that is attached to it. As we said, NRR, your training, your customer training might not be the only thing to function in it, but you need at least to be monitoring and try to figure where you fit into this picture, where you might be moving the needle. It's otherwise, it's impossible for you to gain the support of leadership, to ask for the budget that you need, to ask for the tools, for the resources in order to keep working along this direction.
Yeah, and I just want to say, like, these particular business metrics, they're just there as examples. They're not meant to be prescriptive. Your company may do something else to check, but really starting from that place of the program, how does the company know that that's a problem or opportunity? So in the example of a certification program, we know we have an opportunity to increase our market, so we measure that by marketing qualified leads. So that's why I use that there. And then the product adoption, we're trying to increase net revenue retention. So those are just meant to be examples, but not prescriptive. But you would go by whatever your business looks at for those top line business metrics.
Okay, thanks. So, Vicky, that's it?
That's it. Well, that's it for me. I already ran over, but I, really welcome people to reach out to me, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very easy to find because I snagged that LinkedIn handle of Vicky Kennedy. But yeah, please find me, find my website. I'm happy to chat through this stuff. I'm very nerdy around it and I can talk about it all day long. And I just thank you again, Panos and Learn Worlds for having me on.
Thanks, Vicky, for being part. As I mentioned, even in the first webinar we did, your framework, it really makes sense to us now. We can really understand because every day we see customers who come to us with precisely the same kind of problems and questions and found themselves, in step 5 of your 7-dimensional framework. And this gives us a framework to send them back to your content and say, guys, this is something where you can start from. So your passion about customer education, it really shows. I think we are on time and we'll probably have a couple of minutes to answer a couple of questions. For me, something that I would like to encourage you is, if you don't have a platform right now and you're just starting your program, or if you want to test a platform that might allow you to develop your content more easily, to support different use cases, internal and external, to cater to different audiences in a branded, white-labeled way, to develop content at scale using AI tools and repurpose it, and also offer an amazing reporting and measuring framework that will allow you to support all this work, you can give Learn Worlds a try. Just go there and start a free trial, no strings attached, no credit cards required. We even offer here a little coupon of 20% discount for the next 6 months that will allow you to test it even faster, make the investment and the risk even lower. So feel free to head over to our website and start a free trial from there. And our team, who is very experienced in customer education cases, can help you. So we always try to learn from our customers, see how they do work, and connect you also with experts like Vicky here to give you the answers and support you. If you have a large program and you need assistance in how to approach it, in how to design your program, how to measure its success, how to develop your content, we will be here to support you, and I'm sure Vicky is always available for you to reach out to her. So let's go, if we can, to a couple of questions, and I think we'll be on time. Here we have a question from Christopher. I guess it's to you, Vicky, about your 7-dimensional framework, about whether each of the 7 modules has a checklist in Q&A form.
Well, so yeah, at the time, I would say that the checklist that I think that question came through right before I showed the 6-step checklist, which is the closest thing that I have now. But I am going to be building out kind of a full self-assessment tool on Ectis. So if you follow me, you should be able to get that. But yeah, the checklist that I showed after that question came through, I think is probably the closest thing that we have for that.
Great. And I'm sure that as you go along and discover things, you probably add a couple of dimensions further down. But I guess it's always a work in progress. We learn as we go along. An interesting anonymous question here: are there any risks in unifying your training programs?
Yeah, I actually saw that question come through, and I was like, oh, I want to answer that. I think anything in life has probably a risk, and there could be a case for somebody to say, yes, if you don't keep them separate, then you potentially won't be diving deep into one specific segment, right? Like, and I'm not saying I believe that. I'm saying that might be the argument for not unifying. I've heard, for example, potentially if there's like a partner program and we're not unifying, like that partner program could be like really embedded and dive deep into what everything the partners need to know, and the risk would be that if we unify it, we water that down, right? But I would say that is not accurate if you do actually unify correctly, because unification doesn't mean that we're not also very clearly aware of these different programs that we're solving for. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have a partner dedicated program. It doesn't mean we're not going to have dedicated SMEs or a dedicated approach to that, but it does mean we can actually have a broader impact, right? So I would say that there's not a risk. I think that somebody could probably debate me on that and say, oh no, but you'll blah, blah, blah. I think it really all comes down to how you execute this unification, because you could unify something at a surface level and completely lose all the details for sure, and that would be a risk. But if you do it correctly and you really think about all those aspects of the dimensions that I talked through, then I don't think you would see the risk, or the risk certainly would not outweigh the benefit.
I think the big risk here is in not unifying. I can't think of anything bigger risk than that. So an interesting anonymous question: how do you handle the too many cooks in the kitchen problem? Like multiple teams creating content and things getting messy.
Yeah, well, so my approach to that is when you have like multiple cooks, you bring the cooks together in the same collaborative exercise, and basically like you don't have any one person that's saying here's how it should be done. It's done from more of a group perspective, where it's like, okay, so we have all like 6 of you, and 6 of you are building training content, and some of that content covers different things and different audiences. Let's bring the 6 of you into this whiteboard exercise, and let's, if you think about that graph that I showed, like let's start with looking at our audiences. So make sure that all cooks feel involved in it, so that you're not leaving any cook out, right? And you're kind of bringing everyone in, so everyone's voice is heard, and then you start from this place of like, let's do this together and let's align together. I know that's easier said than done. There's different personalities, but that's been my approach, is just to be really collaborative and do this, in phases where sometimes you do need a decision maker. So ideally there is like an executive at some point that is sort of, able to help set an overall strategy. But if you do involve everyone in it, so it doesn't feel like anyone's voice is not getting heard, then you can potentially get some unification going there.
I guess you also, all the different cooks in this kitchen, they have to have their own metrics, and they have to prove, I guess, to the leadership the kind of value that they bring to the business. And this is how natural, in an organic way, there is some natural competition for resources and the things that you are building. So it's important to be able to document and show the value. And also, ideally, and this is something that we're trying to do, whenever you are connecting these different sides of the business or these different cooks, then you can be very eclectic and you can have some great tastes coming out of a business. Like if you bring in your customer success with your customer education team, with your sales team, they can reach some conclusions and they can bring in together these different perspectives. that can add more value to the business than having them separate. So in my book, at least what we're trying to do in our business is bring these different perspectives and these different roles together, because in many cases, they bring more value in the end of the day than having them separate, residing in different realities, different platforms, different training programs that don't intersect. And they don't answer the unique customer journey that at the end exists. We might think ourselves as a business that has multiple departments and multiple roles and multiple KPIs. On the other end, we have one customer, and that customer has, you need to somehow create a unifying experience for them so that he doesn't perceive the 10 different cooks that exist in your kitchen, but has an amazing meal and amazing experience with your business. And this is how success should look like from a learner-centric and customer-centric view.
Well, also, I'd love to just piggyback on that, because you said, you know, that everyone has their own metrics, which is so important and so true. That's really one of the biggest reasons we see like silos and conflict in an organization, is everyone's like chasing their own metric. But that's why if you can unify in the program strategy place first, there's only so many top line business metrics, right? Like everyone's kind of connecting into those top line like business strategy. And if we start from that place, then you can start to see how everyone kind of actually fits together. You know, so having that kind of cohesive strategy really almost solves for some of that problem organically.
Amazing. So people, if your programs are already too fragmented, try to bring them together. If you're starting now, don't make them fragmented. Just try to build everything in a way that fits together and supports your ultimate business objectives and customer metrics. So I think we're just on time, Vicky, and I would like to thank you so much for being part of this webinar and for sharing your knowledge and your insight about and your immense expertise around customer education with our audience. I really enjoyed it. Hope, guys, you got some great insights to get from this, and some things to start working on from tomorrow. We will be sharing with you a full recording of the webinar as always, so you will not miss anything. Feel free to connect with Vicky. Feel free to visit her website and get access to her to the content that she's sharing there, and of course also with LearnWalls. As we mentioned, you can, if you're looking for a platform, feel free to jump in on LearnWalls, start with a free trial, and our team will be there to support. We really thank you for being here with us today with me and Vicky. Thanks, guys, and see you around.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Vicky. Good night, everyone.